Okay, we'll just start with the next part, but before just moving to this part, whatever thing we have seen in last lecture, that I'll just show you. I'll run that program. Already I have written that program here in that code block, right? So that same I'll just compile it, because if I type in the lecture, then it will take time. So that's why already I have just typed this program. So what we did, what we learned yesterday, we learned the class definition, how we can declare the class, how we can define the functions, and what is the private data, what is public data, and how we can access that data, right? Public and private, sorry, public and private both. So here, that class is the atom. That same example I have written here. That class is an atom, and here the number and cost, these two member or these two variables are the private. So as I said, if you have suppose written that private, then this becomes private. Suppose you have not written this private, again this becomes the private. So this is a default case. So we can delete this private also. So but ultimately that data becomes the private. So that is a default thing. Then next, public data. So that is a get data and put data. So these two are the functions which are the public. It means the outside of this class, whatever the objects are there, these can access these member functions. Okay. So here, that who can access that private data, that number and cost. So only these, the get data and put data, these can access only that number and cost, because these are the part of class both. That get data, put data, number and cost, all these are the part of data. Only number, cost, these are the private, and the rest two are the public. Okay, so that's why only these two functions can access that number and cost. Now here, how we can define that all, again I just told you, if you are defining inside of the class that member function, then that is the same definition whatever we use in C programming. But if you are suppose defining the outside of the class, then here that return type, that is void here, then class name, and then your function. And as I said here, the for the get data, the two parameters are there, because the reason is we have two private data, because we need to assign some value which is coming from the outside of that class to the number and cost. So whatever is the number here for the variable, that number of parameters you can pass to the get data function. Okay, so this is the definition outside the class. So here A and B, these values are coming from the main program, main function. So these values we need to assign to the number and cost. So that's why here these value taken from the main function, and we are assigning here inside of this get data function to the number and cost, right? And as I said, like C programming and C++ programming also, that main function is there, that is a mandatory function, right? If you are not writing that main function, then that program will not execute. So whatever is the sequence of statement you have written in main program, with that sequence only that program will execute. Okay, so here in main program, atom X, so atom is what, that is a class name, and X is the object of that atom, right? And using this object only we can access the public data from that class. So in this class, public data is these two functions, get data and put data. So x dot get data, and we are passing some values here, right? 10, 10.6 something, and again x dot put data. So this is about the x object. Same way, we can create the y object, and we can call this get data and put data function, right? So this was the program yesterday we have seen. I'll just run this and we'll see. You can see that number, cost. For that number, 10 value is assigned. For cost, 10.6 value is assigned. And in for the second objective, for number 4 and for cost 4.5. So this one is the output of this program. So I think you might understood this, how we can write a simple class program, right? Now, sorry, today we will just move toward the next, the concept in this class and object. Sorry. So first, that point that we'll see is the private member functions, because whatever that example we have seen here only the variables are the private. So functions we have considered are public, right? But whatever the today concept we are taking, private member function. Also, we are trying to put the function as a private, right? Because as it is a class, so that in class variables can be private or public. Also, that functions can be private and public. So we have seen, if suppose variables are the private, then how we can access these variables? We have seen in last example, right? But now we'll see, if suppose any function is private, then how we can access that function. That is a one concept that we'll just go for. Second one is the memory allocation for objects. So we have created in last example two objects, X and Y. So how we can allocate that memory for these objects, so that we will see. And two more concepts we will see here today. So static data members and static member function. So these four points today we will see, and tomorrow we'll see rest three. Okay. So first one is a private member functions. So as in this example, this number and cost, these two are the private. Now we'll write one function inside of this private specifier. Okay. So you see, I have just shown here one that example. You can see here. Okay, right. So here that class is taken, that is a sample class. And if you see here, sorry, if you see here, one the member is M, that is a private, and one function, that is read function, is a private. So I'll just write here class sample, and suppose int M, this is a member of this class, this is a private, and here we are again writing one function, that is a read, and that is the private function. And public are again two functions. So void update, then void write, or we can say display, whatever you just want to consider here. Now see, this is a class. In this class, one is the variable, that is a data, this one, and this, and this. These three are the functions. But what is difference between these three functions? So two functions are the public and one is the private function. Okay. So here, normally how we access these member functions. So suppose you want to access that update and write. So we can access these through the object. Suppose that object is like sample and s1, suppose, right? This is object. Then how we can access these? Like s1 update, this is a statement to access this one update. Then s1 write, this is a function, sorry, this is a statement, and one more the function, that is a read, this one, right? But see, if I use this way, so this statement is correct, this statement is correct, but this statement is not correct. Because as I said in yesterday's lecture, so if you want to access anything that is a private here like these, So we can access through only this public data, public functions. Now here, whatever is the functions we have written here, that is S1 read. So S1 is not part of this class, right? So that's why we cannot access or we cannot write this function in this way. So how we can access them? So if you want to access this read, so through this update and write only you can access this one. Getting the point? If you want to access this read function, then we can access through update or read only. So here, this again I just written here s1 dot read. So won't work. Object cannot access private members, right? So this thing is given here because this read is not part of this public, as this is a private. So this can access either through update function or through the write function only. So how we can then access this? So here that given example is through update we can access it. So here this update is a function, and inside of that we have written that read, right? So if you see here, we can do this here. So suppose what you want to do, like see here. So class name is sample. Okay. So how we can define here? Void sample. This is a class name. And suppose you want to define this read function, read, and inside of this we can say cout, enter value, suppose, right? And here we can, whatever that user will enter, that we can store in m, because that m is a part of this private, right? So this directly we can access it. So definition of this private function is similar with this public function, right? So outside of this class I have just written this. So this is similar to this update and write. So same way we can write that update and this void sample and suppose update, right? So here update function already I have just written here. So what we are doing here, you can see we are calling this read function here. This one, right? And last one is write. So void sample. This is write. And suppose same, just you display this cout m, right? This one. And here in main program you can create the object like s1, and only you can write s1 dot update. We cannot write s1 dot read or something, and s1 dot write, this one, right? So in main program only we have created this object and we just call this update and write, because these two are only public functions, and this private function can be accessed through this either update or write. So here we have access through the update function, right? So if I've understood this, the sample program. So whatever is the private member function, if there is a suppose private member function, then how we can access that private member function, that we have seen in this lecture, right? So here M is variable and read is the function. So both are private. So we have seen how to access these two. Okay. So this one. Now we will see. Sorry, again I'll show you that program. Also, I have written that program, same program here. So what is that? Private function. You can see here. Whatever I have just written here, that same thing I just wrote here. So if you see, if you run this program, then value of this, like suppose 14, right? You can see that number is 14. So simply in this read function, we have accepted that value. When in write function, we have displayed that value, right? So this one is the how to access the private member function. If any doubt in this, please ask me. Now we'll just move for the next one. Any doubt? Okay. Then see of allocation of memory for object. Now last I'll just show you here so that you will understand. See, in last example, that class was sample, right? And that object created was like suppose sample S1, right? Our first example that we'll consider of which one? Okay, any cost and number one. So here, whatever is this variable that S1, this is an object, and when we create that object, at that time that memory will be reserved for that object. This is a one thing, but this is not a complete statement, this is a partial statement. When we define this class, at that time also that memory would be reserved. You can see in this diagram it is given. So it is given in two blocks. One is the common for all objects, that is when we declare the class. So that time that memory reserved for the member function one, member function two, something, right? So whatever the member functions we have there, so for these member functions, we reserve that memory. And when we create object like this S1 or suppose S2 or suppose S3. So if you are creating this S1 object, then memory for S1 will be reserved. If you are creating suppose that object S2, again that memory for S2 will be reserved. And when we create S3 object for S3, also that memory will be reserved. That same example I just shown here. In second the half, that object 1, object 2 and object 3, these objects have been created suppose, and that memory for the member variable 1, member variable 2, member variable 3, something. So if suppose in your class three variables are there. Oh yeah, I'll show you here. 1 minute. Suppose here int number and float cost, right? These two variables are there and some public data is there, right? So here functions are there. And if I'm suppose creating that object sample, suppose S1, right? So here, when I just create this S1 sample, then we need space for these two. So for these two, when I create that object S2, again I need space for these two. When I create object 3, again I need space for these two. But when I declare this class, at that time, whatever the member functions we are using, for that memory will be reserved. Memory will be reserved. So here for S1, again two blocks are required, like number and cost. Again for S2, two blocks are reserved for number and cost. Again for S3, two blocks have been reserved like for number and cost. Have you understood this? So when we create the object at that time, whatever are the member variables for that member variable, that memory would be reserved. And when we declare that class, so whatever are the member functions, for these member functions, that memory would be reserved. So that same thing is given in this diagram. So common for all objects. So member function 1, member function 2, member functions 3, likewise. So here again return that memory created when function defined. Right? So that memory will be reserved. Because like that get data functions, we are using two variables like int a and float b, suppose. So for these two variables, again that memory would be reserved. And that would be common for all, because when we call that get function first time, that time two values will be stored into that a and b variables, right? Suppose here these are the get data functions variables like a and b, suppose, right? So when we call s1 get data and suppose 10 and 10.5, so here 10 and 10.5 will be stored. When again suppose we call this s2 get data, suppose 5 and 3.3, so this will be overwritten and this becomes 5 and this becomes 3.3. If again you are writing suppose s3 get data, suppose 2 and 3.8, so here this will be overwritten by 2 and this is 3.8, right? So it means this one is a common for all objects, but whatever that value we are just passing here in this get data, so here that a, sorry, for number we are storing 10, assigning 10, and for cost 10.5, right? It means for one object these two values we are storing, for second object again for number 5 and cost 3.3, right? It means again for these two we need separate memory, and here also for number it is 2 and for cost it is 3.8. So again, so that's why this part is common, but this part is not common. You can see this is not common. Have you understood? So that's why we cannot say completely when we create object so that memory will be reserved, right? That is a partial statement we can say. When we declare that class, that time again that memory will be reserved for these functions. So then we can say that complete statement would be. So this memory will be reserved. Suppose three objects are in this example. If suppose three objects are there, consider S1, S2, S3. So total memory would be these two, these four. So this becomes 2 plus 4. This is 8, right? And here 8, 8, 8 for these three objects for S1, 8, S2, 8, and S3, 8. So this is 24 plus 8. So that is 32 bytes, right? So this much memory would be reserved for these three objects. Have you understood this? If you are getting any kind of confusion, please ask me. Yeah? So this is memory allocation for objects. I think with this diagram and with this example also you might hear. I'll just expand this and this also. You can see here this one, right? So I think with this example you might understood how that memory will be reserved for these objects. So this is the example. Okay. So if anything, please ask me. Otherwise, I'll just move for the next point. Okay. So next point is, that is the most important. That is the different concept again with respect to this class. So static data members. Right. This is one concept again. Because whatever the data members we define in class, so these are also qualified for this static. So here that same thing I've written here. For data members of a class can be classified as a static. So like cost and number. So these are also eligible for the static. So static member variables has certain special characteristics. So these are the three characteristics. You need to understand these three characteristics for the static members, right? First is what? So it is initialized to 0 when first object of that class is created. No other initialization is permitted here. It means whenever we create object, any object, like suppose here, I'll just clear this. Okay. So when we create any object, so at that time, that static variable will be initialized, right? So this is the meaning of this first statement. It is initialized to 0 when that first object of its class is created. No other initialization is permitted here. Now second is what? Only one copy of that member is created for the entire class. So for entire class, only one copy is required there, and that copy is shared by all the objects of that class, right? So that doesn't matter how many objects are there or something. So only one copy of that member is created for the entire class and is shared by all objects of that class, no matter how many objects are created. This is the second, right? Third characteristic is what? It is visible only within the class, but its lifetime is the entire program. Right? So it is visible to that class, but its life is what? To the entire class. Right? Now here, these two lines are also most important here. Static members are normally used to maintain value common to the entire class. So when we just use the static data member, so if suppose you want any value that would be constant for the entire class. So in that case, we use the static data member. So example is given that count. Normally we keep that count that is for the entire class, right? So in such condition, we can use that static variable, and this can be defined in this way. So this statement is most important. Int item and count. Suppose that count is a static member and item is the class name. So in this way, we can define this. So type of this count and this class, and then scope resolution operator, and then count, that is a static one. So this statement is most important. This statement is used to define this. And normally we write this the outside of that class. So here note that the type and scope of each static member variable must be defined outside the class. So these things you need to understand here. Then and then we can move toward the static data. So one example I'll just show you here. I'll just return here that example, right? So that you will understand. You can see here if it is visible. Now what we did here, we have taken that count as a static member, and one number we have taken, that is a integer number, right? But both are the private. So static int count, this is a static member, and integer is the number. And see, two functions are there. One is the get data, and second one the display count or put data, whatever you want to write, right? So here what we are doing in this program, whenever we just take a number, then we are incrementing that counter, suppose, right? So here in get data function, we see here in this private only one function, one variable is there, that is a normal variable. That's why in get data only one parameter we just used. So we are taking that value of A from the main program. Here, if you see this main program to this side, so first time get data 10 value, second time 20, and third time 30, right? So these value we are passing to the get data function. It means when we pass this 10 value, 1 minute, I'll just see here, get data function, right? Suppose first time that value is 10, right? Then for that number, that 10 would be the value. And as I said, when that object is created, that counter will be initialized to 0. So it means this count value becomes 1, right? Then for second time, suppose 20 you are passing, so that number value would be 20 and that count would be 2. Third time, suppose 30, so that number value would be 30 and count would be 3. Now you can see here, these 1, 2, 3, these are the different, we can say memory locations. These are the different memories, but that count is a common, this one. Because when we have suppose this kind of count here, so first time that value would be 1, then we are rewriting that 2, then we are rewriting 3, then 4, then something, right? So this count space is the common, but this space is not common, this and this one, because these are the related to different objects, right? Now here, and in display function, simply we have displayed that count, right? So nothing is big thing into this. Now main thing is what, how that main function will execute here. See here what we did, we have created three, 1 minute, I'll just write to this side. Okay, now see here, we have created three objects, x, y, z. Now first what we are doing, we are displaying x dot display count. So what is there in this display function? Simply we are displaying the count value. You can see here, we are not doing any other operation, we are simply displaying the count value here in display function. So display count, so what is the count value initially? As I said, when this int x, y, z will be returned, so that count value, I'll just count value will be initialized to 0, right? When this statement we write. Now suppose we have written this statement, that is x dot display count. So what is the count value? This is 0 value. It means here that output would be 0. Now for the second, again display count. So this object is different one, but its value is not being changed here. So again that value would be same, right? Now z dot display count. Okay. Now here again that value of count is not being changed. This is simply 0. So again that this would be 0. Right. So with these three statement, x dot display count, x dot display, y dot display count, z dot display count, that output would be 0, 0, and 0. Now next one is what? That is a get data function. In get data, simply we are accepting this value 10 and we are assigning to the number, and then we are incrementing the counter, right? So here, when we just call the next function, oh, this is x dot get data. So I have written, I think here, that same thing I have written here, right? So to this side, this one, and this one. So right. So when I just execute that get data, this you can say x dot get data. This is y dot get data, and this is z dot. So here that value of counter would be 1, then 2, then 3. It means when we execute these three statements, that value of count becomes 3, right? And you just see the last statement, last three statement. Again, we are calling that same function display count. So x dot display count, y dot display count, and z dot display count. So what would be the value of count here? As I said, this is a single variable, right? So first time that value is 1 when this get data executed. Then second time that value is 2. This is overwritten with this 2. And then third time that value would be 3, right? So it means as this count variable is a single, so that value, final value would be 3 only. So output would be what then? You can see here. Output is given here. So when we call the display count first three for the three object, that value is 0, 0, 0. And when we call after just get using that get data function for these three objects, that count value would be 3, 3, 3. Have you understood this? So that is one thing. And see the definition here just written at the bottom statement in this one, right? So this is a count definition. So int item double colon and count. So this is a scope resolution operator. So this is the definition of this count variable. This is the thing. Now see, if you are defining this count like this, so whenever we create that object, so that count value would be 0, initialized to 0. But there are some situation where we need that another value, right? Because like your MIS number, so for computer that MIS number starting is different one. So it means we need to initialize that one with different value rather than 0. So in that case, simply you can assign that value, initial value after this count. Count equals to suppose 10, right? So that 10 would be the initial value. I'll just show you this program so that you will understand here. This is which static member. Okay. See here, this statement, this one, if you are able to see that this cursor is blinking, right? So here when I just run this program, so that output whatever I have shown you, that same output would be count 0, count 0, count 0, and then these 333, right? But if suppose I want the different value, initial value, so what I can do here, I can assign the different value like 100, right? And then I'll save this. Okay. And then I'll just run. You can see that count value, initial value is 100, 100, 100. And after getting three values, so the count value was 103, 103, 103. So it means here, if you want that 0 as an initial value, then simply just write int atom double colon count. So that value would be 0 initial value. And if you want the different value, so that different value we can assign here forcefully, right? So this is the static member variable or member data, we can say data member, right? So if anything in this, again you can ask me. Okay. Now that last point, today's last point that we'll see of static member function. Okay. So this is similar to this. If you understand this static data members, then you can easily understand that one. Only here that main thing is what in the static data member. So you need that static keyword to use that static member variable. This is one thing. Second thing about the definition. So outside the class, you need to define that static variable like this count. Right? These two things are most important here. Rest things are what the similar things, and now whatever the statements you are writing here, as per this statement that will execute. That doesn't matter. Only here How to declare that static variable is one thing, and second is how to define that static variable, right? Now we'll see the last point of this, or static member functions, right? So like static member variables, whatever we have seen, so we can also have static member function. So that is sure, because if you are having the static variable, then we can have static function also. So a member function that is declared as a static has the following properties. So these two are the properties, and how we can define that again also is told you. So a static function can have access to only other static members. It means if you are writing any static function, so that function can access, that can have handle of only static variable. That you just keep in your mind. Like in this example, if you are suppose having the static function, so that static function will not have access to this number, that will have access to this count only, right? This is the meaning of this statement. A static function can have access to only other static members, function or variable, or declared in that same class. And second, that property is a static member function can be called using a class name instead of the object, right? So this is given here. So class name and function, this is a calling statement. So in previous one, that int item count, this was the definition, and here whatever is this class name and that function name, that static function name, this is a calling statement, that you just understand here. Okay, because in main function we write the calling statement. And whenever we just want to define that function, so outside of that class or inside of the class, we can define the function. But calling statement normally we write in the main program, right? So here class name and that scope resolution operator, then static function name. So these things only you need to understand here. First thing is, main thing is what? So whatever is the static data, that only can handle by the static function, right? That is the main thing, right? So that example is shown here, that will understand, right? So here, if you see this example, so here int code and static int count, because if you are using static member function, so you need static data. So that's why that same data we are using, that is count here. And the three functions have been written here. First function is set code, right? And this we are assigning that count value to this code, and the rest two are only for display purpose. One is displaying the object member, and second one is the displaying the count value. So these two functions, display code and display the count. So because see, display code is what? Because we have the two variables here, code and count. So we need to display code as well as we need to display count. But if you are writing, suppose simple the display function, then we cannot display this static member. And if you are using static function, then that function can handle only the static data. That's why here void static, so void display code is the function, and void static count, this is a static function, right? So this static function is used to display the static data only, right? And here again we need to initialize that count variable, that is a static sorry. So here in above the main function that has been defined here, int item and then count, it means this will be initialized to 0, that count value. And we have taken two the objects, one is x and second one is y. See what we are doing here, x equals to set code and y equals to set code. It means we are assigning that count value to this code, right? Here in set code, this function we are executing with these two, and we are calling the static function here. So item display count. So it means whatever is this count value that we want to display here, right? So using this statement, atom double colon display count, we can display the count value. And again, one more atom object we just created here, suppose z atom, and again same the functions we just called z dot set code, right? Again that value would be assigned here to the code next value, and again we call the same static function atom display count, right? So it means here two times we just call the static function, that is to display the count, and at the last three times we just call for the three object display code, display code, display code for x, y, z, right? So what would be the output in this case then? You can see here, right? So for this the code, sorry, when we just display count, I'll just show you here, okay? This one. See, when we like here int atom and count. So when we just write this, so this is a count and this would be initialized to 0, right? Now here in main function what we are doing, we have suppose x and y object. So first is x dot set code, right? So when we just use this, so one value is whatever is the value of this, you can see this function set code. So whatever is the count value that we are assigning to the code. But what we are doing with this, see, after executing this, that this would be incremented by 1, right? Then again, y that dot set code. So after executing this statement, this becomes 2, right? And here the third statement is atom colon double colon display count. It means we want to display the count value. So here we can see display count value. So using this, display suppose count value. So that answer would be 2, right? So displaying 2. This is first display. Then again we have created third object, that is z, and same thing we just called here set code. So when we just call this set code, so this count value becomes 3. You can see here because this has been incremented, right? And again we just call this display count, so that becomes 3. So this is second display, right? And we want to display the code values for this one, right? Here for x, y, and z, right? So you can see here, firstly that code value here, because we incremented and assigned this 1, here code value becomes 2, and here code value becomes 3, right? So whatever is the code value that we are displaying 1, code value 2, and code value 3. So you can see here that output is what? These 2 and these 3. So if you see here, so count value is 2, 2, because 2 times we call the static function, that is display function, and object members, whatever 1, 2, 3, because 3 times. So you have seen here, this is 2, first count value displayed, this is second, and then for the code, there is 3 values. Have understood this? So this was about static member function. So here you need to understand when we can use the static member function. So to access the static data, we need that static member function, right? And that calling statement of this static function is that function name, scope resolution operator, and then that, sorry, class name, scope resolution operator, and then function name, that static function name, right? That is a calling statement. And only that function can handle the static data. These three things you just understand in this static member function. Okay. So I think this is done from my side. If anything, just ask me, please.
Can you please repeat